good to have everybody here tonight. Try to keep my throat clear. Tonight, I always have nerves before I do this, but I'm looking at a lot of smiling faces out there, and it gives me a lot of comfort. So thank you so much, and keep smiling. Tonight, I was thinking, oh no, Pastor Gritton is going to do the same thing that I was going to do. And when he went to Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, that's where I am going to start out. But it says, for by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. And I thought, no, Pastor, don't take my message. But I want us to notice a couple of things tonight in this verse. Verse 8 it says, for by grace, that's God's grace toward us. God has given us his grace. For by grace are you saved through faith. And faith is what I would like to look at tonight. Some people say, what is faith? I mean, how can you determine what faith is? Well, I'm going to give an example of what faith is. If you want to turn to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. And this gives a perfect definition of faith. In chapter 11 and verse 1, it says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. If you stop and think about what that was saying, what this verse says, now our faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's things that we cannot see, but we have the faith in God that he is going to provide for whatever need that may be in our life. Faith is something that is not easy to do. You say, oh, I have all kinds of faith. When the tornadoes sirens was going off Monday, I think they went off about 3 different times that day. But did you have faith that that storm wasn't going to come through and tear up Champaign-Urbana? You know, that's when you start talking about physical things, when you start talking about things that, you know, I could go out to my car and try to start it, and it wouldn't start. But I have faith that when I go to my car, it's going to start. And so this verse says that the evidence not seen. In other words, put faith in place of your worry. Let your faith be instead of your worry. I have faith in God that He is giving me salvation. He provides my salvation. And so I trust Him. Not that I'm holding on to God, but that God is holding on to me. And some people just cannot get that concept that they're not holding on to God. God has got us in His hands. We don't put our hand out and hope that God's going to hold on to us. Now, if you would, turn to Genesis chapter 22. Genesis 22. We saw the beginning of faith. Then we saw the evidence of faith. And now we're going to have an example of faith. And Abraham is going to be, it says, tempted of God. In verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Behold, here I am." Now, Abraham was listening to God. Abraham loved God. And God is about to ask him, I don't think I could do. But Abraham did, and I thank God that he did. And he said, "Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." I used to have a really hard time when my kids were younger. And I would read this, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart, and I couldn't tell this story because I would get too emotional. But Abraham did not flinch. He did not argue with the Lord. I think I would have said, "Are you sure, Lord? Are you sure?" And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac, his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. He just did it. This is a great example of faith. Then on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. You know, God promised Abraham that he would have a multitude in the family. He would take Isaac, his only son. Now remember how old Abraham and Sarah was. They were like 99 and 100. And Abraham, without question, he said, I and the lad will come again. He trusted God. He had full, whatever you call it, what is it? Full faith, full faith in God, that God is going to answer what he said he would do. Think about that. You're taking your child. You're taking your child, Isaac, up the mountain to be sacrificed. He had no idea what was going to happen. God could say, okay, go ahead, sacrifice him. And he would have done it. And the reason I say that is because, and Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hands and a knife, and they went both of them together. Now, not only did Abraham have faith, but listen to what Isaac said. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? By this time, Isaac has surely got the idea, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to be laid on the altar. He has to realize that. And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both together, both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar of the wood. Now Isaac was not a baby. He was not a little tiny boy at this time. He would have been strong enough to fight back. So you're not laying me on that wood. But instead, now think about this. Isaac, the son, loved his father and respected him enough to know that he wouldn't harm him unless there was a good reason. But here he is on the altar. In verse 10 it says, And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. That took a lot of faith. That took a lot of faith. that God is going to provide whatever is needed. You know, when things start happening in our life, in our families, a lot of sicknesses and death that come, and it is so hard to have the faith that we should have that God is going to do the right thing. You know, we think of our doctors. Our doctors have a lot of respect from us. But you know who really does the healing? It's God. God does the healing. And that's hard when your loved one is laying there and doctor says she had, 10% chance of living? 10% chance. And I went from the hospital to work. And this fellow that is the supervisor on the day shift, and I'm on second shift, he comes up to me and he says, "How's your wife doing?" And I just got that word that she had 10% chance to live. And I started crying. I cried like a baby, and I don't know why that particular moment happened, but I couldn't control myself. But Abraham had a far greater faith than I ever had. It says, and the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here am I." And he said, "Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me." God tested Abraham. God tested him. God's word says today that he will not tempt us in a way that would cause us to fall away. But here, Abraham, he is a mighty man of God. I don't know how many fathers. I figure probably the majority would not be able to do what Abraham did. That was a humongous thing that God asked of him. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up upon the burnt offering in the stead of his son. God provided an offering. Tonight, this is a big question. How is our faith? How is our faith doing? It would be a tough thing, nearly impossible, for most people to do this. But Abraham had enough faith in God. If God had not presented a sacrifice, if Abraham would have went ahead and did that, God would have raised his son. God would have raised his son because this was not meant. This is a beautiful picture of what God the Father did for us. He offered his son as a sacrifice. Only God did not stop the world from doing that, even though he could have. He could have stopped that completely, but if he had, then we would not have salvation. And as Abraham is an example for us what faith is, it's putting your trust, your faith in God that he will do what he has said that he would do. And salvation is a big part of that. That's where the grace of God provided for us salvation. And we have to have the faith that he's going to do what he says. We don't always do that. That's why sometimes it's hard for people to understand what God has done, the faith of God. It's hard for us to do that, to put our faith in God, because we are flesh. We are flesh. And that's not a good thing. Well, tonight I would like to, by the way, before I forget it, the living alternative, the collection of the bottles in the back. If you would take one of the bottles and put your spare change in it, or whatever you want to put in it, and then bring it back May the 10th. May the 10th. So thank you for that. That's the only thing I have tonight. How many people need a prayer bulletin? Does anyone need one? Or has everyone got one?